cornea. What's in the back of the eye? What was that called? Retina or sensory tunic. Okay. So what we do is we name this part from lens to cornea up front. What was that again? Anterior cavity or anterior chamber. I'm sorry, anterior cavity or anterior segment. So anterior cavity or segment means lens front. What was all this back here? Posterior cavity or segment. All right, now let's add one more piece of detail. There's a little flap between your lens and your cornea. What was the little flap in front of your lens called? It's colored.
Iris.
The hole in it. That's your iris. Now, some doctor long ago said, hey, look, we have two spaces in the front cavity. You have a space between the lens and the iris, and between the iris and the cornea. What do we call those spaces there? Chambers. So what do you call the space between the iris and the cornea? The anterior chamber of the anterior cavity. What do you call the space between the iris and the lens? Posterior chamber. Here's where your studying is going to matter. You have an anterior and posterior cavity and an anterior and posterior chamber, but the chambers are only in the anterior cavity. Yes, I know.
So posterior chamber of anterior cavity and anterior chamber of anterior cavity. Yeah? Okay.
Both chambers are in the front cavity.
Okay.
So a typical mini quiz question is I ask you, how many chambers are in the posterior cavity? And you just fumble through it and say none. Right? So you got to be careful if I'm asking for cavity, segment, or chamber. Because there's two chambers in one cavity and no chambers in the other cavity. So far so good? Let's make it worse. There's fluid in there. Name the fluid in the back part. Vitreous humor. Literally glassy junk. What do you call the fluid in the anterior segment? Aqueous humor. Watery junk.
Watery junk? They're both watery junk?
Nope, this is watery, that's glassy.
Watery, glassy.
Aqueous, vitreous. So I would recommend spend a few minutes learning the cavity chamber thing on the model, because experience says if you screw up a quiz, that's probably where it tends to get screwed up, is you name cavities chambers and vice versa. Right? So just from experience, that tends to be a place you cry. Right? Then there's one slide you're supposed to know. Let me show you the slide. I've done my job. There is only one slide I could ever show you. It's this one. So if I have a microscope out next week, you just say retina slide and walk away. That's the only slide I'm going to show you. But if you look on the very bottom of the lab sheet there, those are the things you're supposed to identify on the slide of the retina. The hard way to do that is try to actually memorize what it looks like and identify it through logic. You can't do that. The easy way to do it is just figure out the direction of the slide and memorize the order. So for example, up here, the space, that's the inside of my eyeball. This dark thing down here is the outside of my eyeball. So this is facing inside my eye. Then you just learn the order. The very back of my eye, those are the photoreceptors. What do? They receive the light. These guys are nerves that have two sides. They have a dendrite here, an axon there. Last term, what do you call nerves that have two ends? Bipolar. These are the bipolar cells. And these ones collect them all into a group. Those are the ganglion cells. So if I know the order, I start at the back of the eye, go photoreceptor, bipolar, ganglion. I'm done.
Wait, I thought you said that was the front of the eye, and then the
This
top.
is inside the eye, this is outside the eye.
Okay.
So superficial to deep.
Okay.
This way.
Outside.
So this is choroid, this is vitreous humor. So on the slide, if you just memorize the direction of the picture, you have an order. The picture in your book is the flipped over version of this. They start here and go this way. It's the same picture. Right? So my recommendation is just memorize the order of photo, bipolar, ganglion. Just make sure you can figure out which direction they are. Make sense? Yes?
So as the light ray comes, it should be from top down.
Yes.
Through the nerve.
Yes.
To the photoreceptor, signal
Yes.
goes bouncing,
Yes.
the ground goes up.
Next week we'll learn that, but actually it's wired backwards. The light goes through the nerves first, and then the signal comes back out. Yeah, but the light would come through here, hit here, and then the signal goes that way. So the photoreceptors are against the wall of the eye, and then the ganglion are facing the goop of the eye.
Okay.
Makes sense?
Is that where it puts it right side up?
Sorry?
Come in upside down and then it puts it-
That's not so much this, that's the brain. But yeah, it's the same idea. It's backwards than what you think. So spend a minute looking at the slide. I do have one on the microscope over there if you want to look at it. That's the only slide you'll see next week is that slide in some version of it over there. So use your time wisely to go through the